Hello! I have had an idea like this for quite a while. Initially, it started out with me doing time-lapse speed paints regarding books I've read while also giving book reviews and talking about the book itself. But then I had the thought of I have a hard time finding a relevant thing to draw or paint regarding that book, and so I've just decided I've recently seen Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I really like Shadow the Hedgehog. He's cool. I wanted to paint a little hedgehog that looked like Shadow the Hedgehog if he was a real little hedgehog. So I'm just gonna superimpose me talking about the history and general canon of Shadow the Hedgehog while it overlaps a painting of Shadow the Hedgehog. So here we go. So there's a few different canonical iterations and histories of Shadow, since there's a slew of games as well as multiple TV shows, and obviously the new movie franchise, all of which have slightly different canons if they're mentioning it at all. Obviously the movie and the video game did, and that's mostly what we're going to talk about. So Shadow the Hedgehog's very first appearance was in Sonic Adventure 2, which came out in 2001. This was roughly 10 years after the whole franchise started, which honestly, that's pretty wild. That it took 10 years for Shadow the Hedgehog to essentially be made, when it feels like he's been there the entire time. But in actuality, he's a fairly new character in the franchise as a whole, so that's cool. Anyway, Gerald Robotnik, the grandpa of Eggman, as we know him, attempts to create the ultimate life form. Initially, that creation turns out to be a massive salamander-looking thing, full of mecha weapons. He was full of guns and all this Gundam-esque stuff on a massive evil-looking lizard. And ultimately it was decided that this lizard was apparently just too busted to live, which I guess I would feel the same way if I was that lizard. This overall project that all this was under was called Project Shadow. Spoiler alert. Robotnik continued to workshop his creation after scrapping the bio-lizard, and eventually he developed Shadow the Hedgehog. Wink, wink, wink. It's a hedgehog. I don't understand why, in this situation, why the bio-lizard came first and they call him the bio-lizard, but they call Shadow Shadow. You would assume that the bio-lizard would be called Shadow the Lizard or Shadow the Bio-Lizard, since that was the very first creature they made under this whole project called Project Shadow. I guess maybe they didn't get the Shadow name unless it was fully functional, and I suppose the lizard wasn't. He was just known as Lizard. They threw in the fun bio version of it, but essentially every lizard is a bio-lizard because it is a biological thing that exists. I digress. Shadow the Hedgehog also sounds cool. He's a hedgehog. Anyway, Shadow was made using a similar methodology to the bio-lizard by infusing his little hedgehog DNA with the DNA of an alien known as Black Doom, which totally does not sound evil. Black Doom, who would not be addressed until several years after Shadow's first appearance. There's a lot about him in that game. I'm not going to go into it just because it came out several years later, and that's a whole other thing. He fights Bio Doom, I think, or Black Doom, I think. He's little Bio Doom, little Bio Hedgehog Doom. There's a lot more to that, I'm not going to talk about it. But if you look up a picture of Black Doom, he's wild, and also it explains a lot of Shadow's character creation, which, I mean, I understand that Black Doom came after the fact, so a lot of Shadow's look was superimposed onto this alien, but it does also give more credence to the fact that Shadow is goth, he's angsty, and he kind of has these weird daddy issues baked into his character from the jump. Not just from Robotnik, but also from apparently this alien space DNA daddy. We don't know. So looping back on that science, this whole project is happening under the supervision of the United Federation on the space colony Ark. As in the Ark. Very creative. The intent of all of this was to create immortality and harness the power of the quote-unquote ultimate life form. They're trying to harness it as a weapon because, of course, it's always a weapon. Everyone wants a weapon. Which is honestly kind of hilarious, the fact that they're trying to develop it as a weapon, and he's just a goofy. You just get this little guy? You just get Shadow the Hedgehog, and he's just this little hedgehog, and he looks like he just had to ask his mom to drive him to the mall on Saturday so he could go to Hot Topic. But he's this ultimate weapon. It's ridiculous. I understand that the same concept applies to Sonic, and he's essentially kind of like this horrible weapon in a way, but he's just a little guy and he likes chili dogs. But the whole thing is just kind of ridiculous. Anyway, concurrently, Gerald Robotnik's granddaughter Maria also lives there on that ship. I think in some things it also says she was like born on the ship. I'm not entirely sure. She was born on the ship. I'm not sure how she would have like contracted this weird space virus that she has called NIDS. It's called NIDS, NIDS, Neuroimmune Deficiency Syndrome. It's incurable, chronic, fatal, and it's also fake. But it does definitely give certain vibes that imply that it's heavily inspired by like AIDS. There are other things that it could be, but just based on all the descriptions and how they address it and everything, it does definitely sound a lot like space AIDS, which is, again, it's wild. I don't know, it seems like it's approached sensitively, but it just does definitely give that kind of flavor to me. And they just gave it to this little girl and she has it. But Sonic Adventure 2, obviously the first appearance of Shadow the Hedgehog, has this other character named Maria, and you get to hear about all of their history, all of Maria's backstory, all of Shadow's backstory, their relationship with Gerald Robotnik. Yeah. Anyway, so through the research on the Ark, they're trying to cure Maria's illness. Shadow the Hedgehog is created essentially as like an alien genetic bioweapon during all this research, and then they just decide, hey, we've got this little guy. I know he's like the most powerful weapon, the ultimate weapon, if you will, which is what we've been trying to make, but we're just gonna let him kind of chill on this ship with this literal child. And they become essentially best buddies. They grow up together. They are kind of like siblings, which is, again, just insane to me. It's like you make like a robot that is also like a massive gun, and you're like, here you go, little child. Even though it's like a sentient creature, it just feels kind of weird to me that, I mean, he's just running around. I guess he's not going anywhere. He's in outer space. But also at the same time, in the movie, him and Sonic can like just fly through space, which they never explain. I don't get it. I'm not a hedgehog scientist. Maybe they can just do that. But Shadow is just wanting to kind of chill and be a cool guy and hang out with his friend Maria. There's like a whole montage about it where they're like roller skating and playing guitar, and it's really cute on the Ark. But no, that's not allowed. The government said so. Eventually, the massive government agency Gun freaks out, decides that this like big scientific space colony facility doing alien genetic experiments of questionable morality regarding an immortal ultimate life form is dangerous, and, you know, go figure. And they pull this massive raid. This raid results in Shadow and Robotnik's capture, and in the scuffle, so to say, Maria dies tragically. In the games, she dies because a member of Gun literally shot her. Go figure. But in the cinematic universe, she dies in an explosion caused by a stray shot into a container of chaos energy. Chaos energy, if I haven't mentioned it, is kind of this weird, like, radiation energy that Shadow has the special ability to create as part of his, like, ultimate life form powers, I guess. It's powerful, it's cool, they want it science. I thought maybe the reason why they decided to change up how Maria died between, like, the game canon and the movie franchise canon had something to do with ratings, but the game is rated E10, and the movie is rated PG, both of which are essentially equal ratings in their own rights. In Sonic 3, Shadow literally has a Glock and rides a motorcycle, so I'm not entirely sure why they made this specific change to the canon. But my only thought is that it's to show and somewhat explain what chaos energy is and how they essentially mined it from Shadow while on the Ark, as well as to present an opportunity for like a redemption storyline with the general character in the movie by framing Maria's death as an accident, as opposed to game canon where a soldier just literally came in and shot her in cold blood because they're raiding this facility. I don't know. There's also a plot point that revolves around Gerald Robotnik altering and planting false memories of Maria into Shadow from the beginning to lock him into Robotnik's cause, give him a reason to care about helping Robotnik in the first place, give him some sort of emotional, like, skin in the game. But at the same time, it's not widely accepted that these memories are false, and it's kind of viewed as canon that Maria and him were raised as essentially siblings and friends. In the movie, it is definitely viewed that these memories are real, and the whole massive desire for revenge and hate against human beings and humanity as a whole is just the whole thought that he's been on ice for 50 years and he just played this horrible event on a loop, which just exacerbated his desire for revenge and just his hate for the government facility and human beings that did this to him and took away his best friend. In some iterations, Gerald Robotnik is also on the ship Ark when it gets raided. In some, he isn't. There's different diary entries in-game that address this. In some, he's there, he sees Maria die, he gets taken away with Shadow. But then in some, it's implied that he wasn't even on the Ark when it got raided. The only reason he knew that Maria had died is because he read about it. And in that situation, it is also implied that Shadow wasn't ever on the Ark. He was never taken from the Ark. He was built after the fact, after Maria had already died, on the prison planet by Robotnik. And all these memories of Maria were planted into Shadow's head, literally planted into the batter of Shadow as he was getting created. The Japanese script for the game definitely does kind of solidify that whole concept, in that Shadow was developed after the Ark was already raided, and that he was made on this prison planet while Robotnik was slowly just descending into madness out of grief. And so he never would have known Maria. I'm very confused about the whole thing. Everyone kind of picks and chooses which sections of canon that they want to decide are real. Shadow having his mind essentially be unreliable and having this amnesia is kind of pivotal to the main plot point of his whole story arc. In the movie, the memories are generally accepted as real. The characters address it. In the games, it gets more ambiguous and convoluted. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. Either way, Shadow's whole character arc basically revolves around getting revenge against Gunn and humanity, which directly reflects Gerald Robotnik's views on the situation and the loss of his granddaughter, Maria. Essentially, he leans into more of a Batman, anti-hero type character, and Shadow spends his life pursuing peace and protection of Earth, which is what Maria would have wanted. Because ultimately, Maria is painted as this beautiful, amazing soul, this too good to live kind of person, which is tropey, but it's 2001. There. So, the character Shadow, as well as Rouge the Bat, aka Big Titty Batgirl, were developed at their simplest baseline to be foils of the primary characters. Essentially, the bad team to Sonic's good, so to speak, and to challenge them in their views in-game and in canon. Shadow's literally just a goth OC recreation of Sonic that just happened to become canon. If I didn't know anything about the franchise ahead of time and someone showed me Shadow after I had already been introduced to the main crew, I would just assume that he was fake and somehow ended up on the show because someone's dad knew somebody. But I think it's just part of the overall flavor of the franchise and the fan base as a whole that this is just kind of what the characters look like. It's very akin to Homestuck and My Little Pony and all these other franchises where there's just so many duplicate recreations of the exact same character, but each one is a little bit more funky looking than the rest. Shadow was the goth version of Sonic. That's what he is. Shadow as a character isn't super revolutionary. It's a pretty common trope of the dark anti-hero with tragic backstory. He just wants revenge, but ultimately he just decides that instead of getting revenge, he's gonna fight in the pursuit of righteous justice. He's basically Batman. But he also does overlap a lot with another character that came into, the mainstream around that same time. Almost to the point where their backstories and their canonic appearances and how they came to be overlap entirely in this Venn diagram, which is now a circle. Shadow and Mewtwo, the character Pokemon Mewtwo, have very similar backstories in canon. It's a very specific thing, and I never knew that there would be so much overlap with a character whose first several years of life were spent in a tube, surrounded by a small sick child. But apparently that's a big thing. I would love to talk about that at some point. Maybe I will. I like to paint. I like to talk about anime and video games and Pokemon, so maybe I'll combine the two and I'll do something about that. Because if we talked about how Mewtwo and Shadow the Hedgehog were alike, it would be much more of me talking. And I don't really know if I want to start with the long 45-minute, 1-hour breakdown of this overlapping canon of these two characters quite yet. But anyway, there you go, YouTube. No one asked for my opinion, but I've decided I'm going to give it to you anyway. So enjoy hearing about Shadow the Hedgehog from me, while you also see this little guy who's also a hedgehog. Alright, thanks, gang. Bye.